Hey there and welcome back to the channel. So I've been receiving a lot of requests from people for any advice I might have that can help them tackle the task of moving from file share setup over to a SharePoint document management setup. A lot of people just have never done it before and quite frankly just don't know where to start. All they know is that they are sick of folder nesting chaos, a billion versions of the same file and no idea of what is current, and they really just can't find what they're looking for in any reasonable amount of time anyway. And I'm guessing since you're here, you're probably in the same boat. So in this video, I want to share with you my 5-step framework, which probably sounds more fancy than it is really. It's just my approach for tackling these kinds of migration projects. So I'm going to take you through it step by step, and I'll share with you the tips, tricks, and shortcuts I've come up with over the years to take the pain out of the task. Hopefully then by the end of the video, you'll know exactly what needs to be done and how to go about doing it. This video is sponsored by me and Academy 365, which is a site where I have a number of courses that will take you from zero to absolute SharePoint hero. These courses are structured to guide you step by step on how to deliver the most common internet requirements I see day in and day out. Whether you're building a new internet site or indeed need to uplift and revitalize an existing site, these courses are for you. And the best thing is you don't have to be a techie to take them, right? These courses have been carefully designed so they're accessible to anybody with any level of experience within SharePoint. We have the SharePoint Site Builder Masterclass version 2, which is an updated version of my original flagship course. This course guides you on how to create a typical internet department site step by step, jam-packed with the most common requirements I see from real-world experience. We also have the SharePoint Training and Education Platform Site course, which will show you how to create amazing educational experiences within SharePoint. Both courses are laser focused on end user experience, so you'll be able to wow your users, your colleagues, and even your bosses. If you're interested, there's a link below along with a tasty discount. Now back to the video. So to help me demonstrate the process, I've created a sample file share structure. Now don't get too excited, right? It's modest, but hopefully it does contain pain points that you're likely to recognize from your own file share experience. But the steps I'll walk you through are typically the same whether you have 50 files or 50,000 files. It's just a scaling thing really at the end of the day. So here's the scenario. We're a HR team of a medium-sized company and we've been using a file share for years. And everybody is saving files differently, and what started, as a simple structure has just descended into chaos. But now is the time we're going to get away from the madness and live the sweet life in a new purpose-built SharePoint document management solution. I'm going to keep this example as accessible as I can, so you don't need to be an IT pro or a SharePoint guru to follow. In reality, if you're part of a large-scale migration, you'll most likely have a project team, and there will be people with those kind of skills. But for now, let's just assume that it's you and me, we're the cavalry, and we're taking this on ourselves. So what is this mythical framework and the steps we need to go through? So it consists really of 5 main steps. The first being discovery, which essentially means understanding, what we have, who uses it, what is wrong today, and what the future looks like. And for me, it's really important to have this bird's eye view of what we're dealing with, and what we want to achieve to guide us and keep us honest through the process. Then we'll go on to inventory and cleanup, which is really about getting hands-on with the files and being ruthless in deciding what goes and what stays. And this is what you probably think is the most daunting part of the process. But with some simple rules, we can make it a breeze so you don't get stuck, which is the worst thing to happen. And it happens to a lot of people, to be honest. So then we'll go on to the SharePoint IA, and at this point we do have a lot of information to help us. We know what the goal is and we know what we're working with. So now we designed a target structure in SharePoint. Now, spoiler alert, we will end up with 2 sites to replace our file share. One will be for internally public facing files, which is our internet site, and the other will be for our private department collaboration files. Now these are very different use cases, and for me they require a very different approach. So I think it'll be good for me to show you how at least I do it in this video. And then we'll go on to the SharePoint build, and this is where we bring our design to life. And I'll walk through examples of building out both sites so you can see the design in action, really. After we've done that, it's on to migration. Now, there's many ways to do this. And as I said, if you're dealing with an Everest of a file share, you will have support and most likely some tooling like ShareGate or similar to automate this. But we'll do it manually, which I think also has its benefits, if I'm honest. And that's it, really. If you follow these steps and work through them methodically, you can't go too far wrong. Famous last words. So let's start with this discovery. Now, I know that the word discovery sounds like consultancy fluff, right? But we really just are going to be practical and answer some key questions that let us understand what we actually have, who uses it, and what problems need to be solved. And this will inform the target solution, at least what it needs to be, and make the difference really between building a solution people will actually see as an improvement versus simply just uploading your old file share to SharePoint and calling it a day, which really doesn't solve anything and will leave you in a worse position than you're probably in today. Because people are just going to say, well, what was the point? So I typically work through a set of questions with the department I'm working with, and you can do the same in your department. They're not academic questions. They're practical and logical, and hopefully will help you understand the what and the why, and not just the steps in between. And apart from that, I found them extremely helpful in outlining what it is we want to do, and that can really help you with getting buy-in to this work, because there's no real magic pill. I mean, it's going to take a bit of work to do, and you'll need the time to do it. So let's take a look at these questions. Now, when I'm working with teams or departments, I typically use a mind map format to run this kind of a workshop, and the tool I tend to use is a tool called MindMeister, which I'm not affiliated with, but it's just a super tool in terms of usability. So that's how we'll look at the questions now. So this is my typical question set. Sometimes it'll vary depending on who I'm dealing with, and also feel free yourself to add to it, but this would be a solid set to get you going. So what we're looking at here is who uses the content, what problems do people have finding documents today, what content must be visible to all employees, what content is confidential or sensitive, what content processes rely on documents, what is causing this file share chaos, are there regulatory or compliance requirements, and what does success ultimately look like for us? So high level, that's what I work with. And then to run you through an example of how this might play out, really what you're doing is you're going to talk to the people who interact with the content in the file share that we're working with. That's who we need to canvas. And we're going to have either one session or multiple sessions and pool it together at the end. So looking at the first question of who used this content, really what we're trying to do is determine who are the audiences of the content and what high level permission boundaries we might want in a target solution. So if we expand this out, we might find that we have content that is applicable to all employees. And that then in turn might be policies, forms, guides, templates, that kind of a thing. That's going to be your intranet style content. Then we might have content for HR managers, which would be highly sensitive HR content or HR management specific content. We know from our discovery these exist, so we capture them. And then we have content which is for the HR team. So we might have a payroll team, benefits, employee relations, recruitment, that kind of a thing. We're just outlining the high level audiences and the content that they work with. Straightforward enough. And then we can look at what problems do people have finding the documents today. And this is really all about identifying pain points, what's pissing people off in terms of working in a file share environment today. So again, we expand that out a bit and we might see that, well, too many versions is a very common pain point. If we dig a little bit deeper, we might find what is the correct version is a common sentiment. Personal versions and edits everywhere confusing people. It's usually very common. And drafts mixed with final versions, no clear identifier as to what is final. Okay, we've all struggled with that, I'm sure, in the past. Then we have incoherent folder structure. Again, digging deeper into all of these topics, we might find there's too many nested folders. The structure devolves into chaos. Hidden folders, not where you expect them to be. I can't find what I need, just end up creating my old folder. Screw the world and everyone else. People just kind of give up and just do what they want. And then loose governance and permissions, right? So this is difficult to maintain, hard to decipher the permissions. People have access to things they shouldn't, which is dangerous, right? We can't easily manage our own files, and who owns what? Nobody knows. People leave the company and we inherit their mess. This is horrible and always a common one. That's the problem with these kind of nested folder structures. They represent a single person's vision of the world. It becomes static. And a lot of the times they're just not logical to anybody else. So then we move on to what content must be visible to all employees. So this helps define the scope of any intranet style content. Because to be honest, I've yet to come across a departmental drive that doesn't have, the private collaborative content mixed with content that they ultimately want to share with employees. We can identify this now and then design for it in the future. So what content must be visible to all employees? We want final versions of content, okay? And it's going to be templates, guides, forms, policies. And we can see that we kind of already figured that out from up here. So we don't answer these questions necessarily in isolation from any other question. A lot of the times they'll build, so we can always just create a connector that says this is related to this, which might seem obvious enough now. So then we look at the other side of the coin and what content is confidential or sensitive, and this will probably be everything else, right? This is going to help us determine library permissions and segregation. So if we expand this out a bit more, well, we know we need work in progress versions of the same templates, guides, forms, and policies. So these are the versions that we, were working on before we published them to our intranet site. These will have all the comments and the narrative around it. Then we have payroll. So we need confidential payroll reports, salaries. We'll have general HR reports. We have draft content with comments. Again, we can relate this back to our work in progress versions. We have recruitment content, which could be CVs and reports and interview notes. And we have employee relations, which is case files and disciplinary notes. So again, we're getting a very good idea of what needs to remain locked down and available only to the people within our teams. So then we can look at, well, what content processes rely, heavily on document management. And this is where we're going to have business as usual kind of processes that rely on our file shares. We need to ensure that we don't break a process. So we want to be aware of them and then build for them in our target solution. So if we expand this out, we might have recruitment management. So that's all our CVs and our interview notes and that kind of stuff. Performance reviews, disciplinary cases, and payroll reporting. So they all require a structure in which to store the associated files. We want to make sure that we understand these processes and design for them in our new world. And then we can look at some kind of root cause analysis to what is causing the file share chaos. We just do a double click on this. It's very much related to our pain points, but it's important to, at least in my mind, really give it the focus it needs. So we know we have a poor structure, so not obvious where to store things. People don't know what is the current version. There's duplication and proliferation. That's what that's leading to. People draft documents alongside final version with no control on what actually becomes final. So no visibility on final versus draft. There's no oversight in relation to, ownership or accountability, but also in terms of the content that's in here, there's no good filtering and sorting mechanism in the file share. And then lastly in here, a common one is a bit of a critique on search within file shares. Ultimately, it's crap, but we know in SharePoint we can improve that dramatically. And then we have a bit of a grown-up question here, which is, are there regulatory or compliance requirements? So, it's just the way of the world that some content needs to be kept and other content needs to be disposed of in a timely fashion. And really, the answers in this question will help drive kind of retention policies and things like that. Now, just for this video, I'm trying to keep this at kind of user level rather than admin. And this is very much an admin thing. So I'm including it so it's something you want to capture, but we won't necessarily be creating retention policies and that kind of thing in this video, but we'll be aware of them. So in here, we might see that case files should be retained for 7 years. CVs are to be deleted when no longer required. Just examples, but that's the kind of thing you're going to look for. And finally, we want to ask, what does success look like? Why are we doing this and what do you want to get to? So everything before now has been kind of glass half empty and might depress you to your core, but now's the time to, have the North Star, what we're looking for. So if we expand this out, again, canvassing everybody we're talking to, we might find that we really want or desire a simple structure, which is easy to understand. We want to make it easy to find content, make it easy to identify final versus draft content. A bit of version control would be nice in the library and co-authoring, that kind of thing. We just want to really get out of the Stone Age and do things in an easier way. And then lastly, we want clear oversight of everything. We want to be master of our own ship. And the good news is SharePoint will do all of this for us, right? That's why it's such a good target environment to be the home for your document management. So hopefully with these questions and even these sample rudimentary answers, you can see the importance of discovery. You might enter this, this piece of work with a preconceived idea of what the problem is and what the target looks like, but talking to people and getting a consensus is super useful because, you validated or invalidated your initial idea of what the state of the world is. And if we kind of zoom out here, you can see that what started as 8 relatively simple questions has opened up the floor for, discussion. And we get some nice insight from it. And again, this is mind map format, but you might take this and, create a document out of it or something like that. But you'll always have this to hand if you ever need to look back on it or do a sense check throughout the process. And then this sets us up nicely to go into step 2 and beyond. So the next step is really to get onto our inventory and with that, the dreaded cleanup. But let's work with inventory first. So what we want to do is we need to get the structure of our file share and take it into something like Excel, where we can start to analyze it and tag the content as part of our cleanup exercise, which is going to ultimately say what its future or destiny is in a new world. Now, to get this inventory, there's kind of two main approaches you could take to it. If you do have full access to the file share, you can do this directly from Excel yourself. But if you don't have access, or you would just rather not do it yourself, you can always get onto the good guys in IT and ask them to do it for you. It should take them all of 5 minutes to pull an extract. But let's assume you're going to do this yourself and you do have the access. So what you'll want to do is you want to go into Excel, and in the ribbon, go to the Data tab. From there, the first option on the left is called Get Data. And when you drop that down, you're going to go to the From File option. That'll spring out a little menu, and from there you can choose From Folder. That's going to open up an Explorer window, and you just select the location or the root of the file share that you want to extract from. And then from the next screen, you just want to load your data. So as I mentioned, I have a modest file share example set up. Now, I'm a Mac user and I'll die on that hill, so I don't have my own file share to show you. But what I've done is I've got ChatGPT, my good old friend, to create me a visualization of a file share. So if we look here, we can see we have this HR shared drive. Now, if I expand it down, these represent folders within it. So we can see it started off having a bit of manners, but we can soon see that if we expand it all out, we can see it kind of devolves. We get very deep nested folder structures, and we start to see things like personal edits around the place, Mary's version of the dress code, Mary's version of the leave policy, John's edits, version 8, stuff like that. So everything is a little bit of a mess, okay? If we just scan down it, we can kind of see, you know, final 2, dress code V4, final master, you know, stuff that we all know and see around the place. Final old, use if needed, right? They're the kind of things we want to avoid going forward. So it's all well and good seeing it like this in a tree view, but we need to actually have something that we can work with. So that's where our inventory that we now have comes into it. So when you get the inventory, it's going to look something like this. And it's at this point that you might, you know, utter every expletive you can think of, or you might indeed just say, I'm going to give up. This is too big. I'm not going to boil the ocean here. But don't give up, okay? There's ways that we can address this quite quickly and remove, you know, 80% of the content in here in one fell swoop. And that's really the approach that I like to take in here. I mentioned at the start of the video, we'd be ruthless, and ruthless we will be. So the way I tackle this is I typically want to make one of 4 decisions for the content that's in here. And those decisions would be, I'm going to delete it, as in I don't need it anymore. It's served its time. It's rubbish. Get rid of it. There's archive. So archive is our safety net. So if we're not sure if we can delete something and we're not sure if it's active, we can mark it as archive, and that can either come with us or it can stay where it is, locked down in a read-only state. That's fine, but that's our safety net. The next decision we have is going to be private. And this will be content that's private, collaborative content only for our teams, okay? We want to keep that locked down. And then the final option or decision we have is going to be public. This is going to represent intranet style content. So at this point, we know for every piece of content in here, it needs one of the 4 decisions against it. And then I usually have a set of rules which help me determine the decision against any piece of content. So if we were to imagine the content in our file share in a kind of inverted pyramid, we can see here that the largest proportion is going to be the delete content, okay? That's stuff that's accumulated over time, random stuff, and we don't need it anymore. We then have the archive stuff, which also represents a large portion of our overall content base. And that's because people tend to get a bit funny about deleting content. They'd rather, you know, have it somewhere just in case. We all have a little hoarder inside us just waiting to burst out. And then it's the bottom of the pyramid. This is the gold. This is where we have our active collaborative content, the stuff that's actually useful, the stuff we work with and work on. And then the very bottom is going to be our intranet content. So we're really only wanting the bottom part of this pyramid. The top part of the pyramid, that's stuff that we just don't need to bring into SharePoint. We don't need to move our junk from file share over into our nice new SharePoint environment. So that's roughly how we're going to tackle this. But before we do any of that, we want to clean up our Excel spreadsheet and make it a little bit easier to work with. So when we can see in here, we have the name. These are the names of the files. We have the extension, the type of file, the date it was last accessed, date it was last modified, date it was created, and most importantly, the folder path. This is going to tell us our structure, but it's not very usable in this format. So we want to separate out this folder path, and that's going to basically give us a column per level in our structure. So what we'll do is we'll get this here, this column bytes, because we're going to end up replacing that. We're going to copy this. Over here, we're going to say insert copied cells. So we have that in here, and now that lets us delete this here. Perfect. Clear runway in front of us. So we'll select our folder path column. Over in data, we're going to go to text to columns. We're going to say delimited. We'll say next, and we're going to choose other in here, okay? And we're going to use a backslash, because the backslash is how we want to separate this out. It represents the structure in our hierarchy. So I'll say next, and I'll say finish. And now we can see over here we have the structure in here. So what I can do is just delete these two columns. I don't need them. And then we can just drag things out, make it a bit easier to see. And we can see this is level 0, level 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Just drag that across. And what we might also do is, because I like reading left to right, what we'll do is we'll copy these cells here and we'll move them over. So I'll select them, cut over here, insert. And now we can read the structure left to right with the actual file then here, easy to see. And then we'll add in another tab here, and this is going to be the actions or the decisions that we put in against our content. So we'll have our first one as public, we'll have private, we've got archive, and also finally delete. So these are going to be the choices that we'll have against the content. We just put them here, and then we can do data validation to have them as options to select. So then we'll just pop over here. We're going to insert a column called action, and then we'll just select the range, and then we'll come up to data validation in the data tab, drop it down and say data validation. And in validation criteria under allow, we'll go to list, click this box here, and then we'll come to the options we just selected and we'll select them here. Say okay. Now that means for every piece of content, we have one of our options available to us, which is nice. And what I tend to also do, because you know me, I like colors, is I'll conditionally format the rows in the sheet. So if I set something as public, for example, we can format the whole row so it's very easy to see. So I'll select the entire sheet, come back to home, and I'll go to conditional formatting, and I'll say a new rule. I'm going to say classic, and then we're going to choose a formula, and our formula is going to be equals $J1 equals, and then the option that we have. Now $sign just means that it's going to apply to every row in column J, and then public is what we're looking for. And so when this is correct, we want to choose the formatting. So I'll say custom format, and under the fill, because this is public, I'm going to choose a light green color, and we can leave everything else as is. We'll just say okay, and then okay. And what that should mean now is if we said, for example, this piece of content here is public, pop it in and we get it highlighted in green. So I'll do the exact same, and I'll just use different background colors for the different content. So we'll do one more. So again, I'll select the entire sheet, conditional formatting, new rule, go to classic, and we'll choose a formula. So you just want to pop in whatever it is you're selecting. So we're going for archive this time. And again, I'll choose custom format. And for the fill, I'm going to choose a gray color. Because it's archive, I'm going to also change the font color to a gray color as well, just to show that it's grayed out. We're not really considering it, and we'll make it italic for the crack. So that's okay. I'll say all right and okay. What that should mean in here is if I come in here and I say archive, we get it as a grayed out row. And that's typically what I'll do. It just makes it easy to spot things in here. So I'll set up the other rules for delete and private, and then we are good to go. And just like that, we have our conditional formatting in here. So again, just makes things easier to see as we apply our decisions. At this stage, we're good to go. We can't put it off any longer. It's time to start analyzing and applying the actual decisions to the content in here. So we know we want to make a decision or take an action against each piece of content, but it's important for us to decide what each of those actions will actually mean. So when we have public, we know that that's content that is active, we're going to need it, and we want to share it to all employees. So we will be bringing that to SharePoint. And similarly for private, we know that's our private collaborative content, and that also will come to SharePoint. Now, when it comes to archive and delete, this will depend on your approach to what's going to happen to your file share after we migrate. In a lot of cases, people will find they'll delete the content just to clear it up and remove it from the file share. But archive, we can either bring that to SharePoint and put it in a lockdown library that we don't index in search, or we can indeed just leave it on the file share, but make the file share read only. And that's a kind of a safe option because it means that people can't add content into the file share at that point. It's locked down, but they can if they need to, say they said something was archived, but they actually do need it. They can take that and then upload it into SharePoint and bring it across as they need, which, like I said, is a safe option. So with that in mind, we do want to make a choice against every piece of content. And another important point is this is just a spreadsheet at this point in time, okay? It's what we think we're going to do with the content. So don't be afraid to archive or mark things for deletion. At this point, all we want to do is we want to gain momentum. We want to flag as much content as we can as archive and delete so that we have a smaller amount of content that we want to actually pay focused attention to and evaluate. So that's where the rules come in. So the first rule that I typically will put on this is I will look at the dates and I'll say date access, and I'll pick a time period. I'll say if it's not been accessed in the last 2 years, or if you want to be even more ruthless, say in the last year, we're going to automatically tag it for archive. Because if people aren't looking at it and aren't using it in that time period, it's probably not needed on a day-to-day and can safely live in an archive. So I think that's as good a place as any to start. That'll be our first rule. So we can come over to our date access column and we can untick the years that we're not archiving, let's say. So 24, 23, and 22, say. So then with that filter applied, we can come in here and we can say, we're going to say archive. So we've effectively archived all of this content. And that's our first big quick win, because this gets us over that initial hurdle of actually starting. We're building momentum at this stage, and it lets us focus on the content that's been most recently accessed, which, hedging our bets, is probably the stuff that we actually will want to keep. So then we can come up here and we can clear our filter, and we can see we've already tackled a hell of a lot of content in here. And then we can just filter so that we're not seeing archive, and then you'll be left with a body of content that you do need to deal with then. So now we've got our biggest quick win. I'll typically start to look for files that are obvious candidates for deletion. And one tip is really to look at file extensions. Okay, this can be a big clue. So if we drop this down, I usually look for the usual suspects. So things in here. So if I unselect all, I think zip files are often candidates for deletion. I'll look at text files, anything that looks a bit random like a .ini file, and also PNG, because it's usually lots of screenshots and stuff like that. So applying those filters, what we can do is we can just look at what we come back with. Now, if you've got a lot of files, you'll probably look at it at a folder level. I don't have a lot here, so I can look at it at file level. It's really up to you at this point how granular you want to go. But again, this is our first pass, so we just want to try and get through it as quick as we want to show as much progress as we can to make things simpler for our second pass, where we bring other people into the picture. So a quick look at the files we got back here. I've got a text file, which is from a leave policy, a new folder, and it's been submitted for review, so I will probably keep that, but I can give it a decision right now. I'm going to say this is going to be private. Then we've got a zip file here. It's a talent pool, but it's old and it's CVs to review later, so I'm going to say this is going to be archive. So you're kind of putting your detective hat on here and trying to gauge what this is all about. But remember, these are not final decisions. These are just getting us going decisions. Then we've got meeting notes sensitive. I'll come in here and I think that'll be private. I've got a random screenshot in here in a random folder, so that is going for deletion straight away. A .ini file as well in random, I'm also going to pop that in for deletion. So rudimentary examples, right? And obviously very simplified compared to what you'll actually deal with, but it's the same kind of thought process. You're just trying to process of elimination. What can you hedge your bets on and safely get out of the picture so people can focus on the most relevant content, or what you think might be the most relevant content at this point. So now we can remove our filter here. And again, we're just chipping away at what's left is what we're trying to do. So the next thing you might do is you might start to look at the folder levels. And if you click the filter drop down, you'll get a nice view of what's in here. So I could look in here and see, is there anything that I can make a quick decision on? So things like John and Mary, they're going to be kind of more personal edits, private stuff, so not necessarily for the internet side of things. So I can come in here and these are edits on policies and things like that. So I will again just say that these are going to be private for now. Again, we've already taken away the stuff that hasn't been recently accessed. We've taken away random file types. So we're left with the stuff that, you know, has been recently accessed, but this is definitely not public content, so we mark it as private. And similarly, if we come back to the folder, we can untick John, untick Mary, and then we can start reviewing the other folders that we have in here. And you can do this working up the levels or whatever level you find appropriate. And now if we just clear all our filters, we can see the progress that we're making in here fairly cleanly. So it is a bit of work to do, okay? But you just want to break it down into bite-sized chunks. You can tackle it by folder level at any level you want, whatever makes sense to you and what you feel you can handle at any given point in time. But again, this is the first pass. This is where we just want to come in, make the quick decisions. And then that leads us to our second pass. And that's where we're going to bring in other people from the team who actually work in these areas, and they can make decisions on the remaining content. One thing worth saying, if it's not obvious already, don't create this file and share it with people through email, because you have multiple copies and it's going to break your heart 10 times over. Store it in a SharePoint site that you all have access to, or share it from your OneDrive. The key here is you want one file that you all work on, not separate files that you have to try and combine at the end, which is just not going to work. So then for the second part, we want to start assigning content to people and getting them to review it. So you might do this by level 2 or level 3. They're the top level folders in our file share. If we drop this down, we could say that there's a member on our team who's very good and deals a lot with policies. So we can come in here and ask them to have a look at this stuff. Anything that we've already taken a decision on, they're free to review, but the emphasis should be on focusing on the content that hasn't been addressed yet. And again, these people can break it down and work folder by folder, ultimately getting to a point where a decision has been made about each piece of content. And if you give no other advice or guidance, just let them know, when in doubt, archive it. It means it won't be deleted, but we don't have to bring it into SharePoint. We can always get it later if we want. We really want to pick the content we know that we need at this point. So assign out the areas, give people a bit of time to do it. And when they come back, we should have something that looks something like this, where every piece of content has been addressed. And it's not a bad idea at this stage to get everybody together and do a final review of what we have, so everybody's on the same page and knows what we're dealing with. And again, we can very quickly filter by any decision, so we can see, well, what was the public content we said we were going to need? This is stuff that we're going to put on our intranet site. Similarly, we can see all the stuff that we have for private. This is going to make up our private collaborative area. And it's these two decision points that we're going to build our IA around, which takes us into step 3, designing the information architecture for our new SharePoint environment. Now, I've mentioned previously that we're going to use a two-site approach for our target IA or information architecture within SharePoint. So if we have a look here, we can see a rough plan of what we're going to end up with. So it's two sites. It's our HR employee hub, which is effectively our intranet site for HR. And then there's the HR team site, which is the collaboration site for our HR team. I approach the design of these sites differently because there's two different scenarios or two different ways people are going to want to find this content. So if we focus over on the employee hub, the general approach I like to take is that, well, we know we're going to have some kind of a homepage for our HR site. That's a given. And then there's two layers in here. There's the self-service pages and the substructure of the site. For this site, I always like to prioritize the end user experience. So I don't really ever want to send an end user down into a document library where they have to go and, look through a load of files and folders. I want to send them to a SharePoint page which contains information on the topic that they came for and then has the files there ready to go. So I'll have a selection of pages related to the topics, and I'll have a single document library on the site. That's where we're going to put all of our files, and we're going to use metadata to tag the files, which in turn will allow us to create views within the library, and then we can embed the relevant view on the relevant page. And I find this gives the best end user experience because we can tell them about the policies, any supporting context or information we need, and then have the files ready to go. And we maintain them in a single area. And because there's not going to be as many files here as we'd expect in a collaborative area, I think it's reasonable to expect our team to maintain a certain level of metadata discipline so the files appear in the right places. So again, our files are going to live in one document library. They're going to be surfaced on the relevant pages, and the pages themselves, they come from the site pages library. Now, you'll have other stuff on your HR site, but this is just a document management element of it. So then if we contrast that and we look at the collaboration site, the big difference here is that while we're focusing on end user experience on our employee hub, in the collaboration site, people just want to, well, frankly, get shit done, right? They don't want to worry too much about metadata. It'll slow them down. Not everyone loves metadata as much as me, and I've come to accept this over time. So if we look over at what the collaboration site looks like, we're going to end up with something like this. And there's a few reasons for it, so let me explain. So we'll have our HR department landing page. Every site has a landing page. And basically people are going to go directly into one of multiple document libraries. Now, we're using multiple document libraries here because permissions are a thing in this world. We know we have very different subject matter and probably different teams that will work on it. So having a library dedicated to each kind of high level topic will allow us to manage permissions easily at that level. We didn't have that problem in the HR team site because it's open, it's public. So over here, we will still use metadata, but we're going to use really light touch metadata, okay? And that's to solve some of the issues we found in our discovery. So we will use folders, but we're not going to have them deeply nested folders. So an example might be if we look at a recruitment document library, we'll still have a folder for CVs, and we might even have a folder within there by role type. We'll have a folder for job ads and a folder for interviews. So folders are okay. People are used to it, and that's how they're probably going to want to navigate this, but we will make sure that we won't have deeply nested folders. That's something we all have to drink the Kool-Aid on. So at a high level, that's the kind of structure or the difference in structure between the two sites that we're going for. But let's take it back a second and see how did we get to that. So we knew from our discovery that we had content for all employees, HR managers, and HR teams. They're two very distinct groups to me. So that's why the two-site model is usually the way to go and usually works out well. And when we look at the employee hub site, to be honest, I would generally use the same kind of approach in terms of metadata. It seems to have worked well in the past, so it's a good starting point if nothing else for you. So if we look at the structure here, this is just another tab in my Excel spreadsheet. We've got the site, which is our employee hub. In terms of libraries, well, we know we have one. It's just going to be our HR documents. In terms of what goes here, well, again, this comes back to what we found in discovery, and we most likely validated in our inventory and cleanup. We want all employee-facing HR content, approved policies, forms, info sheets, guides, that kind of a thing. Who has access to it? Again, it's very simple. Everybody in the company should be able to read this content, but it's only the HR team or specific individuals who maintain the site who will have edit access to this content. Now, in terms of the standard structure that I typically recommend and use, this is what our metadata looks like within that single library. So I will typically want to tag each document with a type, and that's just to say, is it a policy, a form, a template, or something like that? What is the type of document? And then I'll have a topic. So the topic is going to be the subject matter. So it might be benefits, leave, conduct. So we might have benefits policies, benefits forms, benefits templates. Similar with conduct, health and safety, etc., etc. You kind of see where I'm going. And this gives us the flexibility to create those views and pop them onto a page and make it as useful for people as we can. Other stuff we'll have in here is approved, draft, due for review. That helps us as the people who maintain the content understand the current status of the content, solving some of our pain points. I'll have a next review date in there, and that allows me just to set a date in the future where I want to come back, keep an eye on the content, make sure it's still up to date. And then we can have an owner, so the person responsible for the content. And we can use these two columns in conjunction to set reminders to remind that person, you know, it's time to start looking at this content again. So every piece of content we put in that library is going to be tagged with this metadata. So if you follow a similar structure, what we can do at that stage is we can take all of the content we marked as public, we can bring it into its own tab in our spreadsheet, and then we can add columns in here for the metadata. This just helps us see how we're tagging the content, and when we get to migration, it also helps speed up that bit as well. So we can come down through all of the content here. We can say what's a policy, what's a template, what's info, what the topic is, conduct, leave, recruitment, benefits, status, next review date, and owner. Now, this is the simple version of this, just my example version. You'll have a much longer file. So you're going to bring your team together and you guys are going to work through this. So then we look at the collaboration site and what is the structure we want in there. So we can see here, I have it laid out here. So we know we have our HR team site, and then we want to have multiple libraries. We want to understand what goes here, who has access, and what is the metadata, the light touch metadata that we want in here. So again, I'll come back to my inventory spreadsheet, filter it by what we said we actually do want to keep as our private content, but our working private content. And you come in here, and usually, you know, you're going to look at your folder structure, the higher levels in it. It's really going to tell you what libraries you want. So we have our policies, recruitment, payroll and benefits, and employee relations. And if we look over here, I've pretty much aligned to that. Now, where we have policies over here, I probably have a document library called operations for the general operational content within HR. Policies is then just a folder within that. Similarly, we can look at recruitment here. So I have an area here for recruitment, and it's really level 3 gave me my sub folder structure. So CVs, job ads, and interviews. And I can see I have a folder for CVs, a specific role type folder for each underneath, job ads, and interviews. So keep it nice and structured. Because don't forget, we're going to have version control within SharePoint. So we shouldn't have lots of different versions of content. We can, but we'll be able to control things like that. Co-authoring is a thing now. So you've got lots of tools to help you stop that proliferation in here. But there's still going to be a little bit of discipline in not creating folders within folders. You want to keep an eye on this. So you basically work through your inventory and you'll set out your libraries, consider the permissions, who needs access. That's going to be a big clue whether it's a library or not. So an example of that might be in here we have payroll and benefits. They're kind of different topics in my head anyway. So I would separate them out. So I have a payroll library because maybe it's only the payroll people who need access to that. That's usually sensitive enough. Versus benefits is a different topic, and it might be a different team that work on it. And then we'll have different folders underneath related to the benefits. So you'll kind of feel this out yourself with your teams in terms of what's important, what needs to be segregated, or what could indeed be together. And then in terms of the metadata for this area, nobody's going to really stay up to date on the metadata if we put too many columns in here, because like I said, this is working content. People are just trying to get stuff done. So I'll usually have the same metadata structure across all libraries just for consistency. and really stripping it back to what's really useful. So I might have a status, which could be draft, under review, final, or superseded. Again, coming back to our pain points, we want to solve for our poor structure. So we have the new structure in there. People don't know what the current version is. Our metadata is going to help with that. The whole issue with draft documents alongside final version, well, like I said, co-authoring will help with that. But if not, we do have the metadata to clearly call things out. No oversight, we have all that in there, and search is really going to help us. So we're in good shape to solve the problems that we identified at the start. So again, when you settle on a structure that you feel matches your content, you're ready to take that private content into its own tab. Again, map out your libraries, or level 1, level 2, which would be your folders. You're going to map out your structures and also your metadata. And then you can assign the relevant values to the content, which again is going to help you in migration. All this is a bit of work, but it's a one and done type of thing. We get through it once, then we're in SharePoint, and then we maintain that going forward and leave all the mess behind. That's the theory anyway. So work through the spreadsheets, try and pull your structure together. For me, it really helps to try and visualize it in something like this. This is Figma. I use it all the time. I'll put this as a template on my site in the blog post that goes with these videos. Feel free to take it. So now that we have this IA plan in place, it's time to get into the next step, which is building the structure within SharePoint. So to start to build, we'll start with our employee hub or our intranet site. So here I have a blank communication site. Now you might be working with an existing HR intranet site. There's no problem. Either one is fine. But what we'll do is we want a document library. So the site comes with a documents document library. We'll just use that because it's there. But if you have an existing document library and you want to start transitioning to the new structure, you can always come up to new and say document library and go from there. But we'll just pop into documents here, and we have a totally blank library to work with. And we have the new library interface in here, which is also pretty cool. So what we want to do is we really just want to structure this with the metadata we just talked about so that we're ready to upload and migrate our content. So as a reminder, we want a type column, topic, status, next review date, and owner. So let's start with the type first. So we're going to say add a column. Because this is all contained within a single library, we can just create them as library level columns. There's no problem there. So I'll go for choice. I'll say next, and we'll call it doc type, and we'll go for policy, template, info, form, and finally checklist, which all looks good. And then you don't need to worry about anything else, and we'll just say save. So we have our doc type. And the next we'll add is our document topic. So same thing again, add column, choice, doc topic, and then we'll just add in what we had from our inventory spreadsheet. So conduct, leave, recruitment, benefits, and finally onboarding. Everything else is fine, so we'll say save. Now we'll add in the status, again, another choice, say next. So doc status, so we'll say approved. And then we'll put in due for review. And I won't actually put in draft because I'm going to assume that we will draft stuff in our collaboration site, and we're just going to put in our approved or due for review within this library. So with that, we'll say save, and then we'll put in a date and time column for our next review date. Everything else is fine, so we'll say save. You can drag that out just a little bit. And then the last one is going to be a person column, say next, and this is going to be owner. And we can show profile pictures because why not? And we'll say save. And so that's really the metadata structure that we need in here. The next thing that we want to have in here is we're going to create some views that have us ready to go for when we want to start embedding the content within our pages. And our views are going to relate to our topics. So we can come in here to our topics, column settings, edit, just to remind ourselves. So we're going to basically create a view for each of these so that we can, target that content and pop it up onto the relevant page. So we'll create one, which would be conduct. So we'll say add a view, and this will be called conduct. And we might make it a gallery view because we might make it look a bit nicer on the page. So I'll say a gallery is fine. So I'll say create. And while we have a conduct view here, we haven't told it yet to only show conduct. So we'll make sure we have our conduct view selected. We'll come over here and we'll say edit view. This brings us back into good old SharePoint, and then we'll come in here and we want to filter. So only show items when doc topic is equal to conduct. And we can say okay. And now just to format our gallery view a little bit. So back in all documents, I'm going to say create or upload. I just want to put in a dummy document. So I'll say Word. I'll give it a name of test doc. Now that's saved, which is brilliant. So I can come out of here. We have our test doc in here. So if I come into the document, select it, just want to tag it, go to details. And all we really care about is that it's conduct for the moment. And we'll say it is a policy. And we'll just fill in the rest of the metadata. So we are good to go. And then when we click on conduct itself, we see the document is in here. And now this doesn't look too great. So this is what we're going to fix. So when we're in this view, we want to come over here again and we're going to say format view. And that's going to bring up our card designer. So we're going to select our card designer, which gives us a nicer looking card, but I think we're going to fix that again. So at this point, it's kind of up to you what you want to do. I'm going to take away the file or folder thumbnail. I'm also going to take away the column labels because I think they're a bit self-explanatory. I'll take away modified. I'll take away topic because people are going to look at this content within a conduct page, so that's okay. I'll take that out of there. I'll also take away modified by, and I'll show in the owner with the profile picture. So now people will see it's a test document, it's a policy, and it's owned by Dan. So I can say save, and so far so good. And what we might actually do, totally optional, right? Just if you're into humor, we can add in another column and we can just say it's a multiple lines, a text column, say next. We can call it doc description. We'll say save. And again, just trying to put yourself in the, the shoes of the person who comes here. They might see a list of documents or a grid of documents because we've used a gallery, and we might want to give them a little description to help them understand what each document is about. This is the extra mile that will make your site better than anyone else's. So when we come in here for our test doc, again, I'll pop out the details, and for our description, we can put in anything. So we might say something like, this policy lets you know what is acceptable behavior in our company so that you don't do anything stupid, which comes in something like that, which is fine. And we'll come back to our conduct view. Now we need to add the description column to this view. So I'll come over to here and I will say edit view, and we'll just find our doc description, which is here. And we'll say, okay, so that's perfect. It's available in the view. Now we need to add it to our card. So over here again, and we'll say format view, edit card, and we have our doc description here. And what we might do is we might just bring it up here under name. And now we can see that this is kind of truncated here. We're only allowed 2 lines, but we can fix that. So what we'll do is we'll go into advanced mode. We bring that out a bit. So this is the JSON formatting that you probably hear about. And if you haven't, it's worth having a little search on the web for some examples because you can really do a lot of cool stuff with this. But what we want to do is we want to find where we have document description in here and basically expand the height that we have. So we'll have to do it in a couple of places, but follow me and you won't go too far wrong. So if we come down here, we'll see that we have this element type of a div here, but really you're just looking for doc description. That's the title, okay? And when we come down here a little bit more, still in the same major block, we'll see style. And in here, we're going to add in a couple of attributes that will allow us to see more text. So in here, what we'll do is we'll change the height to 80 pixels. Now you might play around with this to get it just right. So what we want to do is change the height to 80, add in a comma, we'll go to return, and then we're going to pop in white space, and we're going to have normal. Now you need to follow the syntax here properly, okay? Double quotes, white dash space, double quotes, this fella in here, I don't know what's called, colon or something like that. And then we need our double quotes, normal is the value, double quotes again, and a comma because we're going to add in another element below. So hit return, and we're going to pop in word break, keep all. We just want to spell it right. And that's going to make sure everything wraps around and we keep all of our words. So I'll say preview, and we get something that looks like this. Now I know it doesn't look right, but you'll see now in a second because there's a few things I want to point out. So obviously we've pushed this down, so that's not right. We've got these 3 lines after company, and that's not right. And we've got this extra space in here. So a couple of things that we just need to tweak. So we'll tackle them one by one. First, these 3 dots that are in here, they're truncating it. That's because SharePoint was originally only going to allow you to show 2 lines of content, and you might have more. So it pops in these 3 dots to show that there was more. Where you control that is in here where we have WebKit line clamp. That's set to 2. That's basically saying after 2 lines, put in this piece in here. Now we have 3 lines in here, so we're going to expand this. So I'll say to 4. We hit preview, and then we can see that's gone away. But if we went beyond 4 lines, we'd see it again. The next thing is we've got this space between our description and policy, and that's because we've set this to 80. So if we reduce this down, let's say to 70, and we'll say preview, we'll see that we pop up again. We might reduce it further down to 60, and we'll say preview, and then that looks okay. So because we're kind of hard coding in values in here, you want to keep these descriptions to a certain, word or character length, and you can use Copilot or ChatGPT if you're having trouble with that. Just give it the strict conditions and it will stick to it and generate some lovely descriptions for your content. So another thing that we might do, the overall height of the card, it's a bit tight down here at the bottom. So we'll come right up to the top in our code in here, and where we have height, we might just increase that slightly. So we might go to 210. And we'll say preview, and then we have a little bit more padding down there at the bottom. I think that looks pretty good. And if you want to take it to the absolute next level, you can add in buttons in here that will be for either, open the file or download the file if you want to allow that. If you do, I have some code here. I'll pop it up on the site rather than going through every line in it. But basically, if we want these additional buttons down here below the image, we want to find the last Elm type div that's in here, okay? So when we find it in here, we're going to come over here and we're going to collapse that down so we can see that all of that was contained within here. So between here and here. And then we can come here, add in a comma, hit return, and then paste in the code that you'll find on my site. Come in like that, and we can say preview. You're not seeing anything because our card height isn't long enough. So I'll come back up here and I'll increase this to 410 and we can preview. And now we've got a download and open button. Now 4 was definitely overshooting, so I'll bring it back to 3. I'll say preview, and something like that looks okay. So when you're happy enough with this, now you don't have to do this part, but it just can be nice. I'll click save. And now we're looking in pretty good shape in here. So that means every time we add a document in our all documents like this, in our conduct view, it's going to format like this. And then this is something nice you can pop on your conduct pages. And before I forget, one more change that we want to make in here is we've added the buttons, okay? But the default behavior on this card is if I click anywhere on it, it's going to open up the file. So it basically ignores our buttons. So what you also want to do is come back over here to our settings and go to format view. And in here, just below the top where we have the first mention of children, we have Elm type div and we have the default click button. So basically, if you highlight here, just below where it says children, you can see where it starts and ends. You're going to want to take all of this in here and you're just going to remove it. Okay, so that removes that default click and then our buttons will work. And we can also in here hide selection and we can set that to true. So that just means people won't be able to click this little selection option here. So we've made those changes. We'll click save. Now we can click out of this. And now our buttons should work perfectly. So I can't click anywhere on the card, but our buttons work. So if I click download, I've downloaded the file. And if I click open, I open the file. Simple as that. So now we have the formatting of our views that we're going to embed on our pages done. You just want to create the additional views for the other categories. Now, I know you might be thinking, oh, I don't want to have to do all of that again. But the good thing is you don't have to. We can come over here to the settings and we can say save view as. So we effectively copy this view and then it's just a case of changing the filter to target the specific topic that we've tagged the document with. So for example, I'll say save view as, and we can create a new view for benefits. And we'll click save. And now we have our benefits view. And like I said, all we have to do now is come in here. We'll say edit view, come down to where we set our filter to conduct, and we'll change that to benefit. And now it's not showing any content here because we haven't added anything tagged as benefits, but when you do, it'll appear in this view, and that's all you have to do. So do the hard work once and we can leverage it again and again. And so now that we have our views created, what you're going to want to do is you'll probably work in all documents, and that's where you're going to add in all of the files onto this site. And then using the metadata we've added, you just tag them and they'll automatically populate the views that you create. And then an example of how we actually use this to create the pages that people actually come to view this content, because they won't come in here. If we look here, we have an example of a page which is all about conduct. And we've just embedded our conduct view in here, which shows the policies like this where people can download and open them. But you get the benefit of it being on a page that you can surround it with any context that you want, whether it's who to contact, an overview, or a too long didn't read section. It's really at this point that you can look back at your site plan and see how you wanted to segregate the content. So you know how to create the views, you create the views that you will need to meet your design, and then you just build it out and put it in place. So in theory, that's how the intranet site works. So then moving on to the collaboration site with our different approaches, we just want to set it up so that we've multiple libraries. As we can see here from our design, so we know we have the landing page of our site in this example, and then we have libraries as we've laid out in our IA design. So back in here in the site, well, we already have a documents library, but seeing as this is a team site, it may well be connected to a Microsoft team. And with Microsoft Teams, we have channels, and every time we create a new channel, it's going to add it in as a folder within the default documents library. Now, we could structure this using channels, but because all of the shared documents effectively in a channel end up in the same documents library, that restricts us to a single metadata structure. And if we want to change things down the road for different use cases in different work streams, let's say, or different libraries, we're kind of pigeonholed in that documents library. So based on the assumption that this collaborative site is for long-term document management, we can create individual document libraries in here and decouple it from the Microsoft team if it's connected to one. And if yours is not connected to a Microsoft team, doesn't matter, you're going to create new libraries anyway. So let's do that. So looking back in here at our plan, we want to create all of these libraries. And then we have these subfolders within them. We have access to sort out, and then we have the metadata in here. Now I said we'd use a standard metadata set across all libraries, so that might contradict what I said about teams, but I'm talking about flexibility, and looking forward, we want to keep that option open. But for now, we're not going to create these metadata columns one by one in every library. We're going to create them at the site level, and then we can leverage them in every single library without having to recreate them. And it means if we make a change to an option set in one of them, it'll be reflected in all of the libraries. But we'll get to that in a minute. First of all, let's create a library. So we'll start off with the recruitment library. So back on the site, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say document library. We're going to say blank library and we're going to call it recruitment. And we can show it in the site navigation for now. That's fine. And we'll say create. So straightforward enough. We're just going to repeat that for every document library that we have in our spreadsheet. End result will always be something like this. And so assuming that we have done that, what we want to do is we want to create these reusable site columns that we can put into each of these libraries. So what we can do is we can come up to the cog, we go to site information and view all site settings. And then up in web designer galleries, we're going to go to site columns and then we say create. So we want a status. So we'll say doc status. And we're going to make it a choice column. You don't really have to worry about anything down here, but here we want to put in our choices, one per line. So we'll say draft, under review, final, and we might add in one more, which is superseded. And everything else is fine. You can have a default value if you want. You can put it in as draft. That's no problem. We'll leave it as that. And we'll say, okay. And then we'll just say create again for our second column. And we'll call this responsible. And we'll make it a person or group. And then we will just say, okay. So now we've created those columns and we can reuse them again and again in any library we want. So we'll come back to our recruitment library. We can come up to the cog and we go to library settings, more library settings. And under the columns section in here, we're going to say add from existing site columns. We come down here, we find our doc status and we say add. And then we can also find responsible. We'll select it and we'll say add as well. And then we can say, okay, we come back into the library itself. And now we have doc status and responsible in here that we can tag any document with. So you just repeat that process for all the libraries that you've created, and you're essentially there in terms of your metadata for in here. And because these are site columns, if I wanted to add another option into doc status, I could add it in at the site column level, and the additional options will then be available in all libraries at the same time. And so now that the metadata is taken care of, then you just add in whatever folders you want. So we can say create or upload, and I'll say a folder, and we can add in job ads. We can give things different colors if we want to get creative. We'll add in another one for interview notes, give it a different color. And then finally one more for templates, and we're good to go. Now, if you want to be really rigid about preventing people from just adding in more and more folders, you can always restrict that ability and basically turn off the ability for people to create folders within a library. I'm not saying you should do this, but you can if you want to. So if you did want to do that, you come back up to the cog, go to library settings, more library settings, go to advanced settings. And in here we have an option called folders, make new folder command available. Currently it's set to yes. If we want, we can set it to no, and that would stop people from creating folders within your library. You could always come in and turn it on, quickly create one and then turn it off if you want. Like I said, not saying you should do this, but if you want to, you can. But for now, we'll just cancel and get out of here and back to our library. And that's effectively it for the library structure. Add in your folders, add in your metadata, and then you can get on with your life and just start using the damn thing. And so when you have the structure in here, what you want to do is you'll probably start to want to think about permissions. So if, for example, we have recruitment in here and we only want certain people to see this library or have access to it, we're going to need to manage the permissions of this library itself. So at the moment, the library is inheriting the permissions from the site. So whoever's an owner of the site owns everything. Whoever's a member can edit everything. And if there's any visitors, they can only view. But we might want to change that here. So where we manage the permissions on this library, we can come up to the cog, again, back into library settings, more library settings. We can go to permissions for this document library, and we can see here, these are the default permissions that we have in here. Now, if we want to change that, we need to stop inheriting permissions, and that basically breaks the link between the permissions applied at the site level and what happens at this library. So we can say stop inheriting permissions, and we'll say okay. And now this gives us the ability to change what's in here. So we could say we don't want visitors to access this, and we want to remove members as a general group for this document library. So we could select those two groups and we could say remove user permissions. So now only owners of the site have access to this. But what if we want to grant permissions in here? Well, we could do it on a user by user basis by going to grant permissions, and we could type in the person we want to share this library with and they get access to it. But we can also create a group within the site as a permission boundary that we can then add in here. And you might do that if you want to give a certain group of people specific permissions over multiple libraries. It's just about reusing that permission level. So if you want to add them one by one, you can do it here, grant permissions. But if you want to create that group, come back to the home page and we'll come up to the cog here and we'll say site permissions and we'll say advanced permission settings. So we're in here. Now we have another option up here, which is to create a group. So I could say create group and I could name it recruitment members in this example. And for the owner, by default, it's putting me in here, but I can take myself out because I don't want it necessarily to be just me. And I could set it to the owners of this site because this site is called File Share Migration Private. So I'll set it to the private owners, which is good. And then I can give the default permission level for this group and I'll just set it at read for the moment. And then I'll be taken into the group where I can say new and then I can add people into this group. So once that's done, we can come back to home and again, we can go back to the cog site permissions just to check everything. We go to advanced permission settings. We can see we have our recruitment members with a default permission of read at the moment, because anywhere else that's inheriting permissions on the site where we didn't break it like we did in recruitment, these recruitment members will read, which is the lowest level of permissioner access, which is relatively low risk at this stage. But if we want to come back into our recruitment document library just to tidy up the permissions in here, we'll come back up to the cog, library settings, more library settings. We can go to permissions for this document library. And we see here, because we broke the inheritance, even though we created the recruitment members permission group after that point, they weren't automatically added because we broke that inheritance. But now we can grant them permissions. So we come in here, we say invite people, and we can say recruitment. And we see our recruitment members group in here. We can say show options, and you can choose whether or not to send them an email or not at this point. And we can also say what level of permission do we want to give them on this area. So we'll leave it at edit, and that means they can add files and they can work on files and all that good stuff. So now we'll say share. And so now for this library, we see that the site owners have full control over this library, and we've got this new group of recruitment members who they can edit the content, but nobody else on the site can. So you'll probably repeat that process for the more sensitive areas. Now, if you don't have to change permissions, there's no need to keep something locked down. It's all still within the context of the site and the site membership. Leave it default if you can, but just if you need to lock down a specific library, this would be the way to do it. And so now you'll have all of your libraries in here. You'll have your substructures. You may or may not have turned on or off the create folder option, and you've restricted permissions where you need to. And it's at that point, you just want to make sure that your navigation reflects the content of the site. Remember, we want to make it easy for people to find what they're looking for. I say it's even a good idea to update this page to have some quick links to these document areas. Again, anything you can do to solve our pain points of people knowing where stuff lives and what goes where. And because people work in here day in and day out, it's not as important, I would say, as the intranet side, because that's people where they come occasionally and we really want to make sure they find what they're looking for. In here, people will be in and out, so they'll know where things are over time. But again, make it as easy as we can to do that. And so effectively, that's it. We've built our intranet site, we've built our collaboration site, and the last thing really left to do is to start the migration process. Now, before we start the migration, it's important to understand what this actually means. So it's not just we're going to move files from one location to another location. It's more of a cutover point. This represents a major milestone where we stop using file shares for document management and start to adopt SharePoint for that purpose. And so to help enforce this change, it's important that we do something to the file shares to stop people from using them when our intention is that SharePoint is going to be the new place to store and work on documents. So a decision you might take is to make the file shares read only. That means the files are still accessible, people don't lose access to them, but it stops them updating the files where they are and stops them adding more. Because if we don't do anything to our file shares, people, generally will just keep using them and our inventory is going to get out of date very quick. But We can't expect people just to adopt SharePoint without any effort on our part to help them understand it. So that's why a change management exercise in parallel with our migration, and even before this point, is very important. So as part of the change management exercise, we want to make sure that we're communicating to users about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Now, we've done our discovery, so we are justified in what we're doing, and it's backed up by feedback and consultation from the users. So that shouldn't be too hard to do. What you might want to do is also include some lightweight training so people really understand the benefit of SharePoint and that it's not just a cloud file share location. So things like metadata, search, sharing links instead of attachments, one version of the truth, version control, co-authoring, all of this good stuff. We need to make people aware of this and how it's going to solve the pain points we identified earlier on. And to be honest, I can't really stress the importance of this enough. It's so important that people adopt the change, and they need to see the benefit in it for them in order to do it. So let's assume you've locked down your file shares, you've communicated the change, people are aware of what's coming, where they're going to be working and how they're going to be working. Then we can get on to actually moving the files. Now, another point, and it feels like I'm just putting caveats all over the place, is that we're dealing with a modest file share in this scenario where we can tackle it as business users. The level of content is feasible that we can manage it ourselves, but there may be a point, or in your scenario, where you're dealing with multiple file shares and thousands of files, and a manual approach to migration may not be efficient enough or quick enough. Now, that's probably been identified already in your process, but if not, be aware that there are tools out there that can help automate this process. Everything we've done to now is important. You have to do that anyway. But it's at migration we can use our inventories and mappings and basically automate the migration over to SharePoint. And there's tools out there such as ShareGate. Now, I'm not affiliated with it, but I just have experience with it in the past, and it works quite well for this type of task. So if you do have a lot of files and a lot of file shares, it's worth looking into that, but it will need IT. We'll have to call them in to help us out with this because they need the admin access to run it. And there's also a cost element to it. So with all that out of the way, and let's say you are still planning to do this yourself, okay, you're gonna have to roll up your sleeves. There's a bit of work involved and you wanna round up the troops to help you with it. But basically, our way to do it would be to take your inventory like we have here, and this is the employee hub section. And basically in here, we know it's one library, okay? But what we might want to do is we might want to start filtering this sheet on topics. And we can ask the owner then to go and locate these files on the file share and simply drag and drop them into SharePoint. It's not a bad idea to add a column in here which will track your migration progress. So for example, we can add a column called migration status. And we can add the same validation like we had before where we have option, and one option could be done and another one could be to do, and people will just update each line as they go through it so we know what's been brought over. And you might be looking at this and saying, yeah, easy for you to say, Dan, you've only got, what, 9 files in there, 8 files? Yeah, I know. In reality, you will have a lot more, but you can prioritize what comes over. You know, you might focus on the most recent or most active content, and there's nothing to stop you over time. If you forgot something or you realize you need something else, take it from the file share and bring it over. But effectively, you are working through the spreadsheet and you're bringing it across. And when you do this, is going to be important because you want to make sure you're doing it in a quiet period within the business area that you're working in. For example, in finance, when we do migrations there, you're never going to do it around month end or anything like that. You want to time it when it's not going to add disruption to the business, because no one will thank you. Even though we've worked so hard to this point, if we disrupt business as usual, we will get probably a slap on the hand. So pick your timing carefully is all I'm saying. So when you start dragging and dropping your files into SharePoint, you'll pop them in like this. You want to update the metadata straight away. Now you have that from your mapping in your spreadsheet, but it's a good idea to do it. So if you're migrating files over in bulk by topic, you'll put them in here and they'll pop in. You might want to pop this into edit in grid view, and that will allow you to apply metadata in bulk. So we could say have this as conduct, and we could drag it down and it applies to everything else. Same with any of the other metadata fields in here. Also, if you're moving a large amount of files in a drag and drop fashion, when you're adding them in here, don't close this tab down, okay, in your browser. Go to another tab, do whatever you want to do, but leave this tab open. Otherwise, there's a high risk it's going to fail. That's just going to create a pain in the arse for you. And similarly with your private collaboration files, again, you have an inventory. I would recommend working on it library by library, filtering, locating the files and moving them across. And there's not a whole lot for me to demonstrate here. It's really just locate the file and drag and drop it. It's going to take a bit of work, so make sure you give yourself the time to do it. Like I said, get the team involved, share the load, bring things across, keep reinforcing the change with your comms, awareness, training, and do expect a period of time when you've migrated where some people mightn't know where files are. Okay, that's just going to be part of the process. You can help people along. But if you're still in that position after say a month or two, you really want to double down on your change management efforts. find out why people can't find files, and you might need to amend some structure or uplift your site in terms of signposting, like on your homepage and things like that, to help people understand where stuff now lives and how they access it. So a bit of work to be done, but you can of course do it. People do it every day, so don't be discouraged. Just tackle it piece by piece, prioritize what you need. The rest will come along when you need it after that point. And so that's it. If you've made it this far, congratulations. This is by far the longest video I've ever done, and it's actually been, quite a challenge for me to do it. But here we are. So I hope you found this useful, and at least seeing the steps that you might go through in such a migration task. There's lots of ways to do this, right? And you'll probably find ways that you do it better than I've done it. This is just my experience and my example, and hopefully my modest demo scenario wasn't too modest, and you can still see the value and the steps involved. If you've got any questions, feel free to comment below, or else reach out to me direct through my website. There's no problem at all there. If I can help, I'm always more than happy to. And with regards to the video, if you want to like it or subscribe to the channel, that's also great. But no obligation, no hard feelings. I've probably tortured you enough in watching this video if you got this far. So again, thanks for that. So yeah, until our next video adventure, I will see you.